December 20th, 1943. A single choice in the sky changed two lives forever. A German fighter pilot looked into the eyes of a young American pilot, and instead of pulling the trigger, he pulled alongside and became a shield. The choice was illegal, dangerous, and humane, and it turned enemies into brothers. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? He had been flying since childhood. The hum of engines, a comfort he could not explain, a rhythm that moved through his bones. He was precise, skilled, and cold in the ways war demanded. But he also remembered a teacher who had spoken of rules and dignity, words that clung to him like oil to metal. On that morning, the sky over Germany was both blue and dangerous, filled with the thunder of thousands of engines and the thin lines of contrails. Below, cities braced. Above, men chased orders. The bomber that day looked like a house that had been hit by a storm and somehow refused to fall. It shuddered and smoked, patched together by luck and stubbornness. Holes gaped in its sides, like missing teeth. One engine burned, another coughed, and panels hung like loose skin. Inside, young men were fighting to keep breath and hope together. One of them was a boy of 21 who had been handed command on his first mission and given little time to learn how fear sounded in a bomber. But in that moment he was only concentration, hands on the wheel, jaw set to hold the plane together. The routine of battle is a machine. Locate, close, confirm, fire. It is a sequence made to dead-end questions. Ayad landed refueled, checked his instruments, and watched another formation rip by. Then he saw the crippled bomber, flying low and slow where it should not have been seen at all. He climbed into the sky with the practiced motion of a man who had seen too many skies that smelled of smoke and burned metal. His plane responded like an extension of his will, and he followed the bomber with the cool, efficient eye of a hunter. He moved his aircraft into position, not yet committing to the final act. He looked through his gun sight, expecting the outline of enemy intent. Instead, he saw torn fabric and blood. He saw young faces pass the frame of a shattered cockpit, mouths pale in the cold air, hands moving with the thin, tired logic of men clinging to a job. For a moment everything that had led to this attack strategy, medal's reward hung like a cloak he could choose to put on or take off. He felt the weight of a name that his teacher had once said mattered more than medals: honor. The bomber was not a threat. It was a fragile thing, a moving room of human beings who had been given a terrible ledger. One more mile of flight, one more minute, maybe a chance at home. One current was the machine of war. It wanted the kill, recognition, the cold calculation that turned men into numbers. The other current was the rule he had learned from a man who taught him to see the person and to measure his actions by that humanity. To fire was to end lives that were already dying from more than holes in metal. He did not shoot. He moved his plane level beside the bomber in a way that 1,000 rules had not trained him to do. He flew close enough so the Americans could see him, not as an attacker, but as a strange ally. From below, where anti-aircraft batteries scanned the skies with hungry intent, the picture shifted. A German fighter flying with an Allied bomber looked like a captured plane, or a mistaken formation. Confusion is mercy when bullets are waiting for certainty. He knew that the grains of doubts this created among gunners would save time, and time was what the crippled aircraft needed. Inside the bomber, the crew saw a face framed in the wing of an enemy plane, and braced for the sound that ends. They mended with whatever courage they had left, and pushed guns that had little ammunition and less hope. The German pilots signaled, pointing to land, to surrender, to safety on the ground that would mean captivity, but also life. The Americans chose home over capture. They elected to cross the sea, with engines whining and hope stitched into every turn of the propeller. I understood. He could not force them to accept his suggestion without risking other horrors. So he escorted them. He flew in a formation of one, between a bomber bleeding fuel and the shore where the guns would find any target and celebrate their explosion. His plane was visible, a challenge to those who watched, a question that paused hands on triggers. He measured the seconds, like a man measuring the life of strangers with each line of his flight. They crossed the coastline where flak cracked like violent applause, and still he kept his wing at the bomber's side, the two aircraft like a single odd creature in the thin winter light. Each mile was a confession. Each turn brought them closer to the sea that would swallow the danger between them and home. When they reached the open water, when the last darts of coastal defense shrank in the distance, he moved his plane in and saluted. It was a wordless salute, a ceremony of two men who had met at the edge of what was allowed and chosen differently. He folded his wings toward his orders and allowed the bomber to continue. He landed and kept his mouth shut because silence was a kind of armor against accusation, he told no one. The war did not need heroes who broke its rules. The bomber, patched and pained, made it across the sea and into the safety of a battered airfield. The men climbed down and saw the seams in their plane and thought of the impossible way it had been kept aloft. They did not speak of a savior at first because the story would make them suddenly small, indebted in a way that could complicate how they were allowed to be grateful. The memory stayed as a private light behind their eyes, a warmth that could not be explained to command. Each returned to a life that tried to be normal, and found normal was changed forever by a single choice in a cold sky. For decades, the two men kept their secret like a relic. They carried the face of the other inside them, a small companion that would not be visible to the world. One man thought of guilt for kills that had been necessary, and the other thought of the way mercy felt heavier than metals. The memories shaped them, quietly. It did not make up for the noise of war, but it kept the humanity of each intact against the grind of strategy and orders. 40 years later, curiosity and the ache of memory forced a search. A notice tucked into a newsletter, the kind pilots read and then fold away, became a bridge. A name was found, an address, a line that connected two lives again. They met in a room filled with the light of age and recognition. The men who had once faced each other in the sky did not have to explain. Time had softened things that had been sharp, and the human truth between them needed no justification. They spoke without dialogue in the sense the world needs. They met as men who had once been told to hate and found they could not. They became friends. They traveled to air shows and interviews, not seeking to be famous, but seeking to show that a single choice could be more powerful than years of conflict. They laughed sometimes at the absurdity of their lives, and they wept in private for the ones who were lost. Their bond was a living example that defied the tidy stories war likes to tell. One had saved the other, and both were saved in a sense, because seeing the enemy as a human being changed them in a way metals never could. The impact of that December morning reached beyond the two men. It showed that, even in the machinery of war, individuals held the power to choose differently. It suggested that honor is not always the same as obedience, and that courage can be quiet and unrecorded. It taught that sometimes risking everything for a single act of mercy is a kind of bravery that rewrites what it means to be a soldier. The story does not tidy itself with simple morals. It leaves questions that echo. How many other chances were there? How often do rules erode the very humanity they claim to protect? When the men grew old, their lives remained braided by that one decision. They spoke on the phone, they shared meals, and they visited places where planes once roared. They carried memories of a sky that had been both battlefield and mercy seat. When they died in the same year, within months of each other, their graves were a quiet testament, not to victory, but to the fragile, stubborn, human choices that make life meaningful, even when the world orders otherwise. This is not a story about glory. It is a story about a choice, and about the small, fierce light that choice can keep alive. It is a reminder that the rules of war are made by men, and so are the acts that resist them. It is a call to consider the weight of a single moment, and how it can alter the arc of two ordinary lives. If you carry anything away from this, let it be the thought that mercy can be an act of rebellion, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is to recognize